So, once more, the sequence of play demands that after possibly placing our reinforcements and replacement, and before dealing out strategy cards, the allies conduct submarine warfare and strategic bombing. We will not deal with strategic bombing right now because it happens late in the game from turn 9 onwards. But every turn, with the exception of the first turn of the scenario, the allies conduct the submarine warfare, which is they roll a die. And this is the time to introduce our little friend here and our little friend here. These two dice are 10-sided, which have a value from 0 to 9. 9 is the maximum one. 0 is always considered a 0, not a 10, like in possibly other games. So, the allies are conducting submarine warfare at the start of a turn. And if they roll a number which is equal to the game turn's number or less, then the Japanese lose one card from the ones they are going to draw. In addition, they lower this marker, which is the amphibious shipping point or ASP, by one step. Don't bother with that yet, we shall talk about that more in detail later. But before the turn actually starts, the allies roll this die, and if they roll equal to the turn number or less, the Japanese draw one card less and lose one shipping point for the remainder of the game. So, the Japanese player draws one card for each two resources they control on the map, rounded up. So, the resource hexes are these yellow ones, and there is a total of 14 on the map, and for every two the Japanese player controls, rounded up, they are dealt one card during the deal strategy cards segment. So for example, if they control 13 hexes, they draw a full hand of 7 cards. However, during the second, third and fourth turn, which is 1942, they draw a full hand of 7 cards, regardless of the resource hexes they control, due to pre-existing resources supposed to exist for the Japanese. So Japan has stockpiled enough resources to conduct war for the duration of 1942, but they have to capture resource hexes until the end of 1942 if they want to be able to draw more cards and continue their game, which is what happened historically. However, there is a die roll modifier for the first turns of 1942, which is a +1 for the allied die roll for submarine warfare. So for example, if on turn 3 the Americans roll a 3 with their die, then the Japanese player is not going to lose a card because there is this +1 modifier for defective allied torpedoes. There are some certain events for the Japanese that add this Escorts modifier. This applies to the submarine warfare die roll for the allies. So once more, at the beginning of the turn, the allies have to roll equal to the turn number or less in order for the Japanese to draw one card less, and in this case they also lose one amphibious shipping point for the rest of the game. And there's the defective torpedoes die roll modifier, which is +1 for the allies during the 1942 turns, and this is cumulative with any possible Escorts modifier, which is +2 for the first time, and if the Japanese play another Escorts event, it is raised to +4. But if, despite all that, the allies managed to roll well enough, then the Escorts is reduced by one level, so from 4 to 2 or from 2 to 0 if the submarine warfare die roll is successful, but the Japanese never lose their defective torpedoes die roll modifier by a successful submarine warfare. So, the Japanese player may draw a maximum of 7 cards, and it may possibly reduce due to lack of resources or successful submarine warfare to a minimum of 4, never less than 4 cards during the deal strategy card segment. And if they draw 6 cards, they also receive a pass, which is this marker. If they draw 4 or 5 cards, they get 2 passes. This is the maximum of passes you can get. So in your turn, you can either play a card as your offensive or use your pass and then pass the turn to the other player. As for the allied cards drawn, they are not dependent on the submarine warfare. They draw 5 cards on turn 2 plus 2 passes, 6 cards on turn 3 and 1 pass, and from turn 4 onwards they draw a full hand of 7 cards. Unless certain conditions exist, which is namely if the big 3 countries surrender, which is Australia, China and India. So for each of these countries that has surrendered, the allied player draws 1 card less for a minimum of 4 again. And as with Japanese, they receive 1 pass if they draw 6 cards, or 2 passes if they draw 4 or 5 cards. Also there is this track, which we're gonna talk more in detail later, which if reaches a certain level also reduces the allied hand by 1. But just keep in mind that these are the rules for drawing cards at the beginning of the turn. Now, let's move to the offensives phase. After having drawn their cards, players alternate playing turns. In their turn, they can either pass or play a card, which could very well be an event card, play a card for its event, or a military event as an event card, which allows the activation of many units, or they can play any kind of card as an OC, offensives card, or a bunch of other things that we are gonna mention in later sections. But for now, I would like us to focus on how we conduct the offensives. First of all, there's the so-called future offensives queue, which means suppose our hand is this one as the Japanese, we can expend our turn to set a card as future offensive. In this case, we keep it face down near the player board, and this means that this card is gone for this turn, and we may save it for future turns, which may have a better impact if we do it this way. Each card that you place as future offensive cannot be used in that same turn that you set it. And of course, you can only set 1 card as a future offensive one. Each player can save 1 card as their future offensive, and starting next turn, they can use it. Now, let's talk about initiative. Which player plays first? The player to play first is the one that has the most cards in hand. So at turn 2, where the allies will start with 5 cards and the Japanese will start with 7 cards, the Japanese are the ones to go first. When both players have the same amount of cards in hand at the start of the turn, the initiative player is the Japanese player in the 1942 turns, which is turn 2, 3 and 4, and the allied player has the initiative for the rest of the game, starting from the 1943 turns. However, a player can use the card that he has set as a future offensive card in order to preempt their opponent. So, if they are to play second, then they can use this particular card before the other player's first move in order to preempt them and reveal this card and use it. However, if you use your future offensive card this way to preempt your opponent, it has to be used as an EC offensive. So in this case, if we reveal Operation Watchtower, we cannot use it as an OC offensive. We have to normally use it as an event with its preconditions and requirements. And of course, in this case, you cannot use any other kind of card except for military events. The card set as future offensive cannot be the last card that you play at your turn. So, for example, if the Japanese have set this card as a future offensive in a previous round and are also carrying these 2 cards, they cannot play this one and then this one and save this one for the last. If they have emptied their hand, then they can do nothing for the rest of the turn. And this card will remain in the future offensives queue. It can remain there for as many turns as you want, until possibly expanding it. Now, on with the offensives. As mentioned, there are military event cards which can be played as literal military events in order to conduct EC offensives, which means event card offensives, or you can play any kind of card, be it a black or otherwise colored one, for an OC offensive. The differences are 2. First of all, when conducted an OC offensive, then you can only declare one battle hex, and your moves have to either be in order to participate to that said battle or something else unrelated to battle. And when conducting an EC offensive, you can declare as many battle hexes as you wish. The other difference is that if you are conducting an EC offensive, we consult this number, which is the logistics value. So you choose the headquarters that you activated and you add the logistics value of the card to the efficiency rating of the headquarters to determine the number of units that you can activate. Otherwise, if you're conducting an OC offensive, you add the OC value of the card, which is from 1 to 3, to the headquarters efficiency rating. So if you are playing this card as an OC card, you use this number, which is 2, plus the headquarters efficiency rating. So in this case, if we use this OC for South Seas headquarters, it would be a total of up to 4 units possibly activated, 2 plus 2. Now, the cards themselves have a lot of useful information besides the logistics value. Many of them have restrictions regarding the HQ that you can activate. So, for example, if you play this card as the Japanese, which is the invasion of Java, you can only use it to activate the South headquarters and not your other headquarters, assuming you're playing it as a military event. Of course, you can play it as an OC card, and then there are no restrictions. We ignore the text entirely. The text is only useful if you are playing an EC card, so a military event as an event proper. There are also some other details. For example, this card provides the Japanese with some possibly decisive advantage, which is the long lance torpedoes, which means certain types of Japanese naval units, which is these cruiser units, add to their attack strength for the duration of this offensive. And of course, you can check all these unit types here in their unit type indication. So you choose their headquarters to activate and the possible units to activate, which have to be in supply and be able to trace a line of activation from the headquarters. We have mentioned the supply and activation rules in detail, and if you have closely and carefully watched them, then you are the best and you are ready to play this game. But let's now break down the rules for movement. Suppose we are activating this headquarters, the South Seas one for the Japanese, and we can move a number of units. These can be either ground units or naval units or air units. So for air units, the rule is pretty simple. You move this air unit a number of legs equal to the OC value of the card. So in the case of invasion of Java, which has an OC value of 2, we can move this guy up to 2 legs of movement. Each leg has to end its movement in a Japanese controlled or friendly controlled airfield. We can use either the short range, which is 3, but we can also use the extended range for movement, which is 5, as you can see here. So for the first leg, he could go as far as here, and then for the second leg as far as here, for example. Now, you will notice that I am not using the control markers for these hexes, because there is these borders which denote the Empire of Japan's boundaries prior to the outbreak of the war. So the Japanese Empire was quite large, I have to inform you. It included all these islands. These were under Japanese control at the start of the Pacific War. So all these airports are friendly to the Japanese and they can use them for the movement of their air units. The extended range can very well be used for purposes of movement, although it provides some bonus maluses or some restrictions during battle, which we're going to mention later. However, this one range, which is in parentheses, can be used for movement, but units that use this extended range cannot participate in battles during this offensive. So, assuming this one was Allied controlled, the Allied player could not use this range in parentheses of 4 in order to reach this Eniwetok hex and battle the Japanese air forces. Now, upon the air forces completing their move, they can declare battle at a hex that is within their range. The air forces cannot enter a battle hex itself. So, for example, if it starts here, it cannot go here and then here. It has to stop on this island and use its range after completing its movement to declare a battle here and attack the Americans. It can step on a friendly airfield that is currently occupied by enemy units, but it cannot stop its move there. So, for example, if for some reason the Americans were conducting a kind of amphibious assault here in order to attack this island, then during the reaction move by the Japanese player, they could use this one, which is for the moment Japanese controlled, and extend their movement, but they would not be able to stop there. Also notice that the existence of enemy ZOI or ZOE or zone of influence does not impede the movement of air forces in any way. You can very well cross the enemy's ZOI. And you can also use the so-called strategic movement. There are two forms of strategic movement for the air units. One is to move double the number of allowed legs. So for example, if we have played a 2 OC value card, we would normally be able to move 2 legs, but in this case, we can move 4 legs if we move strategically. So for example, if we start here, we can go 1, we can go 2, we can go 3, and even continue our movement strategically. However, in this case, we lose our zone of influence during movement, and we cannot enter a neutralized enemy zone of influence. So it is kind of a hasty move without the unit being in combat readiness during its move. So you don't have your own zone of influence, and you cannot enter the enemy's unneutralized zone of influence during strategic move. It is just to move faster. However, spoiler alert, there is not much point in doing so with your aircraft because you can move normally the normal number of legs while maintaining your ZOE, and then during post-battle movement you can move again the same number of legs, and practically your movement allowance remains the same while you also maintain your ZOE during your move. However, I'm telling a lie here because there is a valid reason of using strategic air movement, and the reason is that after concluding your strategic air movement, your unit regains its zone of influence at the end. So let's take this example. The Japanese are using this one, airplane, for strategic movement, and the card they have played is in this example a 2OC1. And with a normal movement allowance of 2 legs of movement with a maximum range of 5, it would be like 1 or 2 steps. But because they want to conduct strategic movement, they want to move it further. And in this case, they forfeit their zone of influence, but continue their movement in double movement allowance to a maximum of 4 legs. And they reach this hex, the airport of Ulithi. Notice that in this case, there is allied zone of influence here. So if there was not the zone of influence of this air unit, they would not be able to reach here, because when conducting strategic air movement, you are forfeiting your zone of influence during movement. But because we have this friendly air unit here, which projects this zone of influence here, we can reach this hex. And upon concluding our movement, we regain our zone of influence again. So in this case, after moving here, we project our zone of influence here. And when it's time for the allied player to conduct his reaction movement, he will be greeted with a surprise because his long-range bomber cannot neutralize the enemy's zone of influence. So in this case, he is out of supply and he cannot move this unit because it is within a neutralized zone of influence. However, there's a second form of strategic movement for the air forces, which is you can take the unit and send it to the game track, which is here. So, by strategically moving your unit out on the turn track, you will guarantee that on the next turn's reinforcement phase, before the turn even starts, you can place it as reinforcement. And because airplanes arriving as reinforcements can be placed in friendly airfields, as we are gonna see, this is a smart way to move your air forces in places where they would not be able to arrive to otherwise. So let's assume the Japanese player has plans of conducting an operation towards Oahu, Hawaii, and wants to conquer it. In this case, they would not normally be able to reach the airfield of Johnston with their normal or extended range of 5, but in the previous turn they could have strategically moved it to the turn track, and since they were equally smartly and amphibiously assaulting Johnston and occupying it, next turn this is a Japanese controlled airfield and they can place this airplane here as reinforcement. And of course this would be in supply because it would be in range of the South Seas headquarters. However, this one particular unit is an unfortunate example because this has the yellow dot in its upper right corner, and this means it's a pre-war unit, one that cannot receive replacement, and this also holds true for strategic air movement. If you remove it to the game track as part of strategic air movement, it cannot return to the next turn as reinforcements because in general, if for any reason it leaves the map, it is eliminated. It will not return to the map. So you can do this smart move, but with another air unit. For example, this one, which is not a pre-war one. So let's now proceed to the naval units movement. Naval units activated may move up to the OC value of the card being played times 5, which means for an OC offensive of a value of 1, for example, it would be up to 5 hexes. If it had a value of 2, it would be 5 more hexes, and if it was a value of 3, it would be able to move 5 hexes further. However, there are some restrictions regarding the destination of the naval movement. So, your naval units, be it surface ships or carriers, can end their movement either in a friendly port to you or in a hex in which or from which they can participate in a battle. For example, if Aoba moves here and the Shokaku moves here, it can participate in this particular battle, so it is a legal destination for naval movement. And the last possible destination is in order to support an amphibious landing. We have not talked about the ground movement yet, but ground units can either move over land or conduct a kind of amphibious assault. But in this case, there's an additional restriction that the ground unit has to already be in the hex before you move to support the amphibious invasion. Also, there's one more thing we have to mention, and this is that if a carrier is participating in a battle, another naval unit may stack with it in order to kind of shield it in a battle. So, in this case, Shokaku is participating in this battle and Aoba does not have the necessary range or possibly does not want to move in the battle hex proper, and it can instead coexist with Shokaku in the same hex in order to shield it or aid it or escort it during the upcoming battle. This is another legal destination for the naval units. And I have to make clear that you can either move your units one by one or you can move whole stacks of units in order to conduct a valid movement. So for example, you could move Shokaku and Aoba together from their hex, or you could move Aoba and the SS brigade in order to conduct an amphibious invasion. Anyway, these are the restrictions for naval movement. And then you can, of course, post-battle move them. Actually, you can post-battle your naval units and air units with the same movement allowance that they had during the offensive. So if it was a 3 OC value card, for example, it would be another 15 hexes for the naval units, and they have to reach a friendly port during post-battle movement. Also, you can strategically move your naval units by forfeiting your possible zone of influence, and in this case, you cannot enter unneutralized enemy zones of influence, but you can move double your movement allowance. So, for example, if Shokaku is starting from here and the OC value is 3, then it can conduct a strategic move of up to 30 hexes far. But in this case, it forfeits its zone of influence during movement, which it otherwise would have. And in this case, it cannot move through here because there is the neutralized zone of influence of the enemy air units, which otherwise would not be a problem because naval units ignore enemy zones of influence while moving, unless they are moving strategically. And of course, during strategic movement, it has to end at a friendly port. However, there is a possible use to strategic movement for naval units because, for example, you will notice that the American headquarters in Oahu is pretty far from the action, and maybe the Americans want to move their naval units faster than they normally would be able to. So even if the card is a 3OC1, 15 hexes are not nearly enough to bring the naval units into action because there is no port here, nor here, nor here, nor anywhere controlled by the Allies. So Lexington would not be able to go that far, but if it conducts a strategic kind of movement, it can reach all the way to here, because, for example, Ulithi might be an Allied controlled port, and in this case, you can strategically transport your naval units and have them ready for the next action. However, at the end of the naval unit's strategic movement, it regains its zone of influence. So what would be really interesting is to conduct this kind of strategic movement. Say that Lexington was far away and it could not reach this port, which would be the case with a 1 OC value card, for example. We play a card of 1 OC value and we cannot reach this Allied controlled port because our movement allowance is only 5. So by conducting strategic movement, we move 10 hexes away, and Lexington loses its zone of influence during the strategic movement, but upon reaching the port of Ulithi, it then regains its zone of influence. So after concluding our movement and regaining our zone of influence, and possibly conduct our other kinds of movement, like this one, for example, then you will notice that the South Seas HQ is out of supply in this case because of the zone of influence of Lexington. So this is another nice feature of using strategic naval movement to move as far as you want and then re-establish your zone of influence. Now, onto the ground movement. There are 3 ways actually to move a unit. One is overland. So you choose a unit that is in supply and you move it overland, expending a number of movement points depending on the terrain. And again, it's time to look at the possible terrain features. This is mountain and costs 3 movement points. This is jungle and this is mixed hex and costs 2 movement points. And this one is a clear terrain, which costs only 1 movement point. And of course, there are the transport routes, which you can use for a sole cost of half a movement point if both sides of the transport route are either unoccupied or solely occupied by your units. When a ground unit enters a hex occupied by enemy ground units, the enemy ground units can disengage, but only if they have got a greater strength than the invading unit, and if they can retreat into another hex which is not the one from which the attacker came, and which would not cause an overstack. This is a special type of movement that does not require activation of the units. It's called ground disengage, and it happens during the offensive player's move without interrupting his movement. So, for example, if this 18 strength Japanese army unit enters Dhaka and the Allies have got a total strength of 24 in this hex, they can immediately disengage from the hex, but it has to be all of the ground units and before an additional ground unit comes which would raise the Japanese strength to 27 and which would be higher than the defending force. So upon the first Japanese guy with a strength of 18 enters the hex, all of these ground units may disengage, for example, onto Calcutta, and then the moving unit can continue moving if it has remaining movement points to do so. So, for example, in this case, the Japanese army could continue moving. Of course, not to Calcutta, which is prohibited for the Japanese, but it can continue the other way and keep placing control markers. And the Indians will live to fight another day. So the other way to move your units is twofold. It is by sea, and it is either strategic ground transport by sea or amphibious assault. And you will notice that this is largely a game of amphibious assault and landings. You will see some overland actions in certain theaters, but for the most part, you wish to invade islands and land and take control and expand your territories this way. Of course, if you happen to meet an enemy air or ground unit or headquarters, you have to stop your movement. And of course, a battle is going to happen. However, naval units do not impede your land movement. You can keep moving. Now, on to strategic ground transport. Strategic ground transport is conducted by sea, and it can begin in any coastal hex, therefore any hex adjacent to sea. However, it has to end in a friendly port. And the length of this transport is just like with naval units, the OC value of the card times 5. So if we have played a 2 OC value card, we can transport this guy from here to times 5 hexes. So 10 hexes at maximum, and then our movement at a friendly port. So for example, we can reach this port of Truk, or even this port of Eniwetok. And forgive me about that, but of course, as Western guys that we have to struggle a bit with these Austro-Polynesian and Southeast Asian names. This is an issue always in games revolving around the Pacific theater, but for purposes of this tutorial, this will be Eniwetok. So this was a legal strategic ground transport ending at a friendly port. 10 hexes. This is the maximum movement allowance. However, if you start at a port and conduct strategic movement, you can double your movement allowance, just like a naval unit would do when moving strategically. So in this case, with a 2 OC value card, you could move up to 12 hexes away until reaching a friendly port. But in all these cases, you can of course not cross an enemy unneutralized zone of influence, just like a naval unit would not be able to during strategic movement. And the third and probably most difficult way of moving is amphibious assault, which is the following. You start in any coastal hex, any hex adjacent to sea, and move to any friendly or enemy hex, whether there is a port or not. Of course, if it was a friendly port, it would be for the most part smarter to move by strategic ground transport if you can. But if there is no port and you want to reach it, or if it is an enemy controlled hex and you want to invade it, you have to conduct an amphibious assault. And this is where this marker comes into play. Every time you conduct an amphibious assault, you spend a number of amphibious shipping points, or ASPs, reminding the Japanese lose 1 shipping point each time the submarine warfare is successful. They start with 7 and can possibly lose a number of amphibious shipping points during the game, but they can never lose their last amphibious shipping point, so the minimum is 1. And for each amphibious assault, the amphibious shipping points cost is the following, and you can track it using this marker for amphibious shipping point used. For a ground unit of a brigade or division size, which is this one is a division, the amphibious shipping point cost is 1 in order to conduct an amphibious assault with them. However, this is an unfortunate example because these are Indian units and there are certain nationalities of units that are not amphibious assault capable, which is these 3. Indian, Chinese and Dutch units are not amphibious assault capable, and they can conduct neither strategic ground transport nor amphibious assault. They can only move overland. So if you notice closely, the Dutch can only defend their own islands, the ones they are garrisoning, and cannot move to help other people around the board. Same things kind of happens with the Chinese and the Indians. They can only move overland in their CBI theater, which again means China, Burma and India. And also Chinese units have a further restriction, which is they can only operate in this part of the board, which is China, Burma and northern India. They cannot expand their movement further. For larger kind of ground units, which is corps and armies, this is a corps and this is an army, the cost for the amphibious assault is 1 amphibious shipping point per step. So this one would cost 1 amphibious shipping point for the allies, and this one would cost 2 shipping points for the Japanese. And especially for the Korean army, which is this one, there is an additional cost. It is 2 amphibious shipping points per step. And as for the Allied amphibious shipping points, they start with 0 in the first turn of 1941, and they gain each turn 1 amphibious shipping point. There are 2 restrictions when conducting an amphibious assault. First of all, you cannot cross an unneutralized zone of influence. So, for example, if this guy wants to invade this island of Yap, this cannot be done because there is the zone of influence of Lexington. But they can stack with this carrier and they can do it like this because this carries its zone of influence with it on the move. So Shokaku helps this guy make a landing at Yap. The second restriction is that you cannot move through a hex or end your amphibious assault movement in a hex that is containing an enemy naval unit unless you are stacked with a naval unit of yours for the entire duration of the movement. So this guy cannot move here because there is the naval unit, and they cannot move like this because they have not been stacked for the entire duration of their movement together. It had to be like this so that they can do this. So it's one of the few occasions where you have to move your units as a stack in order to achieve this. And as we mentioned previously, in order to cover the amphibious landing with your naval movement, the ground unit has to already be in the hex. So you cannot move Shokaku here to cover the amphibious assault and then move the ground unit. However, you could, for example, move your unit here in order to attack the enemy unit, which would be a legal move, and then you can move your unit for an amphibious assault. Also, let's not forget to mention that the Japanese, in particular, have the so-called organic transport capability. So this means that units that are either CA or APD or CL type, these 3 types of naval units, can move with Japanese SN brigades. And SN, I remind you, stands for Special Naval Landing Forces. These were special forces of the Japanese Navy. And if they move as a stack together, they can move at no cost at shipping points. So you can stack this guy with the CL Tenryu or APD Kamikaze or CA Aoba, and if they move as a stack, they can amphibious assault without the expenditure of an amphibious shipping point. However, in this case, there would be the problem of the unneutralized Zoi, because as you see, Aoba has no Zoi of itself. So you have to move them as a stack with Shokaku, for example, so that this one can neutralize the opposing Zois on the move. Now, when moving overland, you gain control of the hexes you cross on the move. So for example, if you move from Wewak to Aitape, you also gain control of Aitape on the move, and you still maintain the control of Wewak, of course, which we use a marker to denote when you are not present. However, when talking amphibious assault, it has to be successful in order for the control to change. So if the SN stacked with Aoba and possibly Shokaku invades this hex, we have to wait and see how the battle goes, and if the Japanese manage to make the landing here and win the battle, then the control will practically be placed. Otherwise, it is not a controlled hex. So for example, if this is an Allied controlled hex and you conduct an amphibious assault, you cannot move your Tenryu unit here because the control has not yet been changed. However, if the amphibious assault is successful, this means control reverts to Japanese, and you can post-battle movement your naval unit there at the end of the offensive because it is now Japanese controlled. Another restriction for amphibious assault is that you cannot amphibiously assault any mountain hexes, with the exception of Port Moresby. So for example, if the Japanese want to conduct an amphibious assault, they can do it here in Port Moresby, but they cannot do it on any other kind of mountain hex. Also, regarding the US ground units, there's a special restriction for US Army ground units, which is the green ones. They cannot amphibiously assault any Japanese controlled and occupied one hex island if there is no marine unit of theirs in the hex that has amphibiously assaulted first. So, for example, this ground unit can invade Nauru, assuming it was Japanese controlled,
because it is unoccupied. So they just spend one amphibious shipping point and assault here and take control of Nauru. But if they want to invade Tarawa, then it has to be first that the Marines enter the hex because it is Japanese controlled and occupied. So you spend one amphibious shipping point to do this. And then the US Army ground unit, the green one, enters the hex via amphibious assault by spending one more amphibious shipping point. 我は官軍我が敵は